No such thing as a bad question. Teachers are taught that in Teaching 101. Never tell a kid they have a bad question.
So first off, I want to thank you for coming and doing the interview, because I am actually genuinely excited to start recording this history of the Space Center, because there's a lot that I've realized I don't know.
And a lot I don't know.
Yeah.
Because you're talking to people that I've never actually sat down and spoke with in great detail about what they remember.
Let's see. To start off with, I would like to know about your experience in 1969 for the Apollo moon landing. Do you remember that, first off?
I remember the big hype about it, but I don't have a very good memory of my childhood, so a lot of that is just gone. Mm-hmm. But I do remember that we were actually at a family reunion. And so that certain Sunday in July is when we always have the family reunion. And so we were at a family reunion when the landing took place, if I remember right. And so I don't think I got to see it on TV. So.
Okay. But you did hear about it because there was.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was huge in school, and it was a big topic of conversation for everybody. So it was a huge deal. I just don't remember seeing it on TV. Okay. So.
Do you remember it having much of an impact on your life? Like, wow, that's cool, I want to be an astronaut someday, or?
I was already really hooked on space even before the moon landing from Star Trek. So Star Trek started in 1967, I think. And so I'd been watching Star Trek for, well, however long it went, 2 years. And then, so, yeah, I was already a big science fiction fan through Star Trek, so anything having to do with space was something that I kept my eyes on.
That's cool.
So, yeah.
Out of curiosity, what was your favorite moment from Star Trek, the original series, that really kind of captured your imagination as a kid?
I loved the stories where there was an aha moment in Star Trek, where they realized something, like the one episode which is where I got Panay and Panau. There's one episode where there's a planet with half their face is black and the other half is white. So some of the people have the left side black, and another group has their right side black. And there was extreme hatred, and it was an escapee who had run from the planet and being hunted down by someone whose mark was on the other side. And the Enterprise got that person. And the whole episode was defending that person's right and protecting that person. So Panay and Panau Intolerance comes exactly from that Star Trek episode. So things like that, where as a kid, you're sitting there watching and going, no, you shouldn't judge people by which side of their face, was one color or the other. Because I think at the end of that episode, they go visit the planet to take them home, and the planet's all blown up to pieces because of their hatred. It wiped everybody out. So they were the last of their civilization. And so that really drove the point home to me, and it taught the lesson of intolerance and tolerance more so than any school lesson. And of course, in the late 60s, mid to late 60s, we had all the racial riots, and we had the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and Kennedy's assassination, and so the whole country, we had the Vietnam War going, and so the whole country was on edge, always on edge. Every time we'd watch the news at night, I'd see black people getting hosed down and, arrested, and dogs sicked on them, and, problems getting them into schools and desegregation, and that was huge. And, that episode. So any Star Trek episode that had that kind of a moral teaching to it really made were the things that I really remember about the series. One of the things I liked about it. Because they took Earth's problems and they projected them into the future on other planets, which kind of took the stigma away from Earth. And it showed the problems we were having in the late 60s on another planet with different people. And then I got to see the future humans deal with the situation the way humanity should evolve to. And so I got to see the right way to handle the situation, whereas what I was seeing on television was the wrong way to deal with the situation. So that's what I loved about Star Trek.
That's really cool.
Yeah, a lot of good episodes in that original series.
Yeah, I'm actually not super familiar with that episode. I feel like I've seen a lot of the original series, but I must have missed that episode, so I'll have to go look that up.
Yeah, I mean, they did predict a lot of stuff. The episode with the M5 computer, I think, that takes the ship over and starts thinking on its own. There's AI for you right there.
Yeah, wow, that's cool. So I'd like to just kind of go from this into kind of your teaching career. So you grew up in South Dakota, and you decided to go to BYU.
Well, I graduated and I went to South Dakota School of Mines and Technology first, which was a local school in Rapid City where I grew up. So the plan was to get freshman year out of the way there, then mission, then come back, and then decide either University of South Dakota or BYU.
Okay.
So.
And why did you decide, or what gave you the choice between University of South Dakota or BYU when
Because I got accepted.
Okay, so you got accepted to BYU.
I got accepted to BYU, and so that's the reason I came to Utah. Pretty simple.
Because you didn't have any family here?
My uncle had moved here. So my mother's brother had moved to American Fork, and so there was a member of the family here.
Okay.
So, but I would have come anyway, just to get out of South Dakota and experience the big wide world.
The big city of Utah, Provo, Utah.
Yeah, Provo, Utah.
So when was that, about what year when you moved out to Utah?
Let's see. It would have been the school year of 81.
Okay.
Is when I started at BYU.
Nice. And you started originally in special education, is that right?
Well, general ed.
General education.
I still had a bunch of those general ed courses to take, and then I thought I would do business, so I took an economics course and hated it. And I thought, no, I need to be working with people, so then I thought I'd do social work. And I took a social work class and realized that it's just so many people's problems all the time. And I just wouldn't be good with that. But every time I would pass the McKay building, which is the education building, I knew that's where teacher training took place. And I thought, I really would like to be a teacher, but I knew teachers didn't make any money. And, I wanted to make some money. But I kept feeling like, that's where you need to go. So I took a teaching course and I liked it. And then I talked to one of the professors, one of the male education professors, and I told him my problem. I think I'd like to be a teacher. I just know teachers don't make a lot of money. And he said, well, there's other ways. You can supplement an income and stuff like that. And I thought, and he also said, you can teach for a little while and then go into administration, and then you'd make money, decent salary. And I thought, okay, I'll go that route. So I made the switch over to education, and I went into special ed for they called it emotionally disturbed. And then it was emotionally handicapped. So I was going to be a special ed teacher for the behavior kids, emotionally disturbed. And so I took those courses, and I did a practicum at the children's ward at the state hospital in Provo, and I liked it.
What made you want to do special ed initially?
I think I was after a challenge. I wanted some kind of a challenge. And I think I was also looking for mobility in teaching. I didn't know how easy it would be to get a regular teaching job, and I knew special ed teachers were in demand. And so I went that route, but then I was running out of money because I was paying my own way through school. I had Pell Grants, and I got a scholarship or two, but I didn't want to take any loans out, so I was paying my own way through.
Yeah.
And I was running out of money, and I was working at the Provo Temple, so I was working 20 hours a week.
Were you
which is
cleaning or
cleaning?
in the
Yeah, I was on the
cafeteria?
cleaning crew
Okay.
at night. And so I went into the office and I said, what can I do to graduate real fast? And they said, well, if you take spring and summer courses this year and you drop special ed and switch to general ed, then these courses will disappear off your agenda and you will be able to graduate in August.
Oh.
So I said, done. So that's when I switched to general ed.
Okay.
And then I went spring, summer, and I graduated in August of
Those-
'83.
Okay.
And then I got a teaching job right there to start the '83-'84 school year here at Central. So,
Wow.
so yeah, I made the switch, and I did my student teaching here at Central, which was a mistake. Not that it was a mistake on my part, but when I was assigned to be a student teacher,
Yes.
they assigned me to a school in Springville,
It was like
to
a
a
third
fifth
grade-
grade class.
fifth grade, okay.
Yeah, and I was all ready to go and everything, and I went into the education office, and they said, we made a mistake. We got you switched with another teacher that really wanted a fifth grade. It's your call. Do you want to be? You can keep that, or we do have this sixth grade opening at Central in Pleasant Grove. Would you consider taking that?
Yeah.
And I said, sure. So that brought me out to Central.
That's cool. So I'd like to back up a little bit about in your college experience. What was your favorite part about teaching or learning about teaching while you were in college, and what did you really enjoy in your classes in your college experience?
I just looked at college as something I had to do to get to where I needed to be. I looked at it as just a bumpy road that I had to go down. I'm not going to say I really enjoyed college. I don't think nobody enjoys. I know a lot of people say I love being in school and I love all that, but I just wanted in and out as quick as I could, because when you're paying your bills, you just want in and out.
Yeah.
And I'd wasted enough time changing majors.
Between the
And
business.
so I just needed to get in and get it over with. And I hated writing papers because they were so laborious, the days before computers. So you'd have huge card catalogs to go search for books.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you're typing everything on manual typewriters and trying to get footnotes and everything in on a piece of paper with a typewriter is a real pain in the neck. And then, of course, you make mistakes while you're typing. And then you got the whiteout that you're putting in there to try to correct your mistakes. And it would just take forever to get any papers written. So, and before Xerox machines, we would have to type our papers with carbon paper between them so we could get two copies. So you'd put in a paper and then a carbon sheet and then another paper. And so you'd have two copies of whatever you were typing. But
You have
Yeah.
to hit that pretty hard.
you'd
make
have to
sure it
hit.
transfers,
Yeah,
right?
you had to type hard.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So I was just glad to get out of school.
Yeah, that makes sense. What did your family think of you going to be a teacher eventually?
My mom didn't care. My dad advised against it. He's, said teachers don't make any money, so, I don't know why you want to do this, but there wasn't any kind of pressure. They couldn't exert any pressure. I was paying my own bills, so I wasn't getting anything from them, so they couldn't withhold anything from me. So, yeah,
So you just kept doing your own thing.
I did my own thing. Yep.
I remember you saying earlier in a previous interview that you were well known by your professors to kind of have more innovative or creative lesson plans.
Yeah, they all said to me, you're going to be a good teacher, just because I always like to do things out of the box. And so whenever I would have to do a demo lesson or I'd have to do something like that, I'd always try to do something a little different than what everyone else was doing, just to stand out, make it a little more interesting. And so...
Do you have any of those that are more memorable?
No, nothing that I really remember. No. Okay. I just remember always trying to do something different.
Yeah.
And there weren't many men in education anyway. I mean, it's the same way it is today in elementary ed. You've got like 10 women for every one guy that goes into elementary ed. So there weren't very many of us guys in the program. So we already stood out.
And you're just trying to stand out just a little bit more.
Well, you had to show that you're just as good as any of the girls that were in them, that were there.
You're in the minority.
You didn't want to get. We're the minority. We don't want people to think that men can't do it. So,
going into your student teaching, that was in the spring of '83, right? Because you graduated in August, and you were in Mike Thompson's class for that. Which I think you remember, Mike Thompson was actually my 6th grade teacher at Aspen Elementary.
That's right.
Yeah, and so he's one who I also want to try to reach out and talk to him a little bit. But how many students did you have in your class when you were doing the student teaching?
Probably, it would have been right around 30.
Okay.
Most class sizes were about 30 back then.
It was a pretty good sized class.
Most of them, 30 was good. A lot of times you'd have more. Just depends.
Yeah. I did see this note right here that you mentioned the student teaching office made a mistake, and rather than sending you to the 5th grade class in Springville, you were sent to the 6th grade class in Pleasant Grove. Looking back on that, do you feel like that had a major impact on how your career went? Just in general?
Sure, because I came to Central and I student taught with Mike, and the 6th grade teacher next door, Mr. Franson, was in his early 70s, and he was having trouble staying awake in class, and there were issues with him, and that would be his last year. And so I finished student teaching, and Mr. Franson told the principal that he was retiring, and I went to Mr. Emmel, who was the principal, and I said, I'd love to have that teaching job. And so he offered it to me. And so that opened the door for me to go right into 6th grade here at Central, which kept me here at the school.
Yeah.
And Mike was already here and had already done that thing with Mike. And so, everything was already in place. And space was in the 6th grade curriculum.
Yeah.
If I had gone into 5th or something, I'd have a whole 5th grade curriculum. So I don't know whether I would have done this or not. But I would have done a simulation for sure.
Yeah.
Because I was a believer in running simulations in class, educational simulations. But I mean, if I'd gone to that 5th grade, I probably would have created some elaborate Revolutionary War simulation or something. But
How did you come to believe that the simulations were an effective tool for teaching in the class?
Because the kids love them so much. The kids love simulating different things, and it gave them a kind of a game feel. And they remembered things a lot more, doing it in a simulation than just hearing me do a lesson. So the retention is a lot better through a simulation. The downside, of course, is the time it takes. Because running a simulation takes a lot of class time. Because the kids are in discovery mode more than lecture mode. And so they're learning, but they're learning by doing, which always takes longer. And so it would eat up a lot of class time. So you have to kind of pick and choose, if you're going to do simulations, what you can get away with within the time frame that you've got to teach. And so...
And how did you learn this method of teaching? Was this something that you learned at BYU? Is this something that you saw Mike do and thought that
No.
you'd do it something else?
I just did it myself.
You did it yourself.
No, I didn't know any teachers that were running any simulations. I just thought, how can I reenact this in a classroom? You know, and then I would just, the big thing with me is I just play it through in my head. So I would just sit and envision the room and envision where everybody is and how it would flow. And, you know, sometimes the simulations worked and sometimes they didn't work very good. So you have to adapt and adjust.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it wasn't just the space thing. I also ran full government simulations as well in 6th. And so there was always a simulation being run in the room. Social studies, and we did the space. So there were 2 sets of simulations running most of the year.
Wow. And so you were doing that from year 1, from the start of having your teaching at Central. What types of points would you hit usually on those types of social studies and space simulations? Would they be concurrent, or would they?
They'd be concurrent.
They would be, okay. And so you just kind of hit points and teach them throughout
Well, the government
year.
simulations were just one way of organizing the entire class. So the simulation ran all day long when we were running the government simulations. So, I mean, there was a bank, and there was the government setup, and there were government officials, and all of that was just a way of managing the class. So the kids just lived within that simulation from the first bell to the last bell. And the space thing was something we would have to set up for, you know, okay, we're going to do space and arrange the desks and then take it down afterwards. But the government simulations ran all day long.
Do you have any memorable moments of, wars starting between governments or the kids, or something else like that?
I mean, the first simulation we ran was monarchy, and so the kids fought World War I from Russia's side. And I was teaching what an absolute monarchy was by having a czar in the class. And they learned all about World War I by living it instead of me lecturing it. So I really didn't have to do any lectures on the war. They just lived it. And so they would arrive at school, and I would have I would have to handwrite newspaper articles on big butcher paper, and the articles would be on the wall, you know, that day's newspaper, and it would have headlines, and the kids would all check the headlines to see what was going on. And as the day progressed, I would have other news flashes come up. So I would be, if I'm teaching spelling or something, I would sometimes stop and just grab another headline and put it up on the bulletin board so the kids could see what's going on in the world around them while we're doing this lesson, you know, on spelling. And so that's how they learned, you know, about the Archduke's visit to Sarajevo, that he was going down there and what he was trying to do. And, you know, and then a news flash would come in that there was a bomb thrown and he survived, and that would go up as a headline in the class, and the kids would go, "Ooh, what's going to happen now?" You know, that kind of stuff. And so it was a lot of fun to see the kids' reactions to the news as it was coming in, learning it and seeing it the way the people would have back then, you know, news flash. And then, of course, when the assassination takes place, you know, then they know there's trouble brewing. And then, of course, the Tsar gets involved, and his cousin, the Kaiser, and telegrams are flashing back and forth, and we had ambassadors in the classroom. So there was a German ambassador in the room, and there was an American ambassador and a French ambassador, and the ambassadors would get notes in a folder that they would have, and it would tell them, at this time of day, you're going to stand up and say this thing, or hand this letter to the Tsar or stuff. And so the ambassadors were actually playing the role of their countries, you know, from there. So the kids were hearing these embassies stating their viewpoints on what was going on. So they were getting different opinions on what was happening. And so, but again, the preparation was enormous. because, I mean, once you had a simulation written and functioning, you just kept everything, you know, in files, and you just pull it out again.
Yeah.
But when you begin to write a full simulation, you know, when you have that kind of intricacy, you have a lot of work you have to put in. And so it just took a lot of work.
Yeah, I can imagine so, especially with you handwriting all of the newspaper articles and headlines and everything else like that. That's a lot of work to do, but yeah, saving it for the next time, and I'm sure improving it the next
Sure.
year or something else like that is very beneficial.
Uh-huh.
So that's really cool. Because that's something similar you do today in your classroom.
I still do it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Except I don't start till January. Because you need to have something, because that's a long dry spell, January till spring break.
Yeah.
You know, when there's no real big holidays to look forward to, and there's, you know, you got to have something. That's when a teacher needs to reserve their punch to keep the kids really active and engaged. And so that's when I begin the government system. So this year they'll play World War I again, but they'll play it from Germany's viewpoint. I switched from Russia to German, and so they will have a class Kaiser, and because I want them in Russia, they needed to learn the Russian Revolution, and so they did that was always the funnest part of the simulation, is the class would rise against the Tsar.
Oh, really?
I didn't have to stage it; they did rise against him, and it was remarkable to behold, because the kid playing the Tsar would do his very best to hold power, but the kids would rebel. And I had a big war map on the board. One of the bulletin boards was just a full map of World War I, but Russia left the war, and so that map came down when Russia left the war, and then a map of the city, St. Petersburg, would go up, showing all the different parts of the city, and then the Bolsheviks were taking over.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't the Bolsheviks, it was the revolution that toppled the Tsar. When the Kerensky government came in, the democratic government took first, and then the Bolsheviks overthrew the democratic government. And so you had the democratic forces taking over parts of the city. And so I would be teaching, and I had little red markers that indicated some part of the city fell. And so I would just be teaching whatever subject I'm teaching, and I had a little tape recorder with explosion sounds. And I'd be teaching, I'd lift over and hit play, and an explosion would be heard.
Yeah.
And then I would grab a red dot, and I'd come over and put it on the central telegraph station, the water pumping station, you know, and different parts of the city were falling under this revolution that was occurring.
Yeah.
And I'd look back at the Tsar, and he's in the Winter Palace, and I'd say, "What do you want to do?" And he'd say, "I'm staying." And the kids are going, "Down with the Tsar, down with the
He's
Tsar."
not fixing
And
things.
he would hear it, you know, and he knew there was trouble. But they would always try to run, you know, at the very end, you know, when the last train station out, you know, and he would see it's about to fall based on what's coming towards it. And he had one road between the palace and that one train station. And most of the time he would say, "I've got to go." And he would run to the bank and gather all of the rubles that he could hold, the money from the
really?
bank. And he'd say, "Where do I go?" And I said, "Go to the door." And he would go to the door, and then I would have somebody outside the door waiting for him.
Oh.
So he'd open the door, and somebody would be there and arrest him on the spot. And then the tears.
Oh, no.
Lots of tears. So I'd have to prepare parents ahead of time sometimes. Because a poor kid would be drug into class, and
Yeah.
the whole class turned on him.
Oh, man.
So, but I taught the point.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
So
That's memorable indeed. Wow. And the space simulation is something similar, because it wasn't all during class. You'd kind of have to say, "All right, let's assemble our desks
And
into
it
a
wasn't
position.
run all year. We would just do the space simulations during the space unit. Once in a while, if the class was a good class, because they would goof off too, they're all
Yeah.
kids. Sometimes some classes handle the space simulations well. They all did well with the government simulation, but the space simulations required more imagination.
Yeah.
And some classes did it very well, and we would run it all year, just like one episode a week.
Okay.
Other classes, they didn't do that well on it, just a lot of goof-offs in the class, and we would just run the simulations during just the space unit. So,
And so what would you teach during the space unit specifically?
whatever the curriculum had,
Okay.
you know, whatever the space curriculum had for sixth grade is what they would go out and visit and see. And then I'd throw in an alien encounter or something
Yeah.
just to spice things up.
And did you have a kind of overarching story during these times, or
Yeah.
especially with those longer once?
It was all Star
type
Trek.
things?
You know, they were a starship, and a lot of the kids knew Star Trek because they'd watched it on TV also.
Yeah.
So it was very familiar to them. So it was just Star Trek episodes.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So you had the hand-drawn controls. Those are not the same. At least those are the same ones that you use that are currently mounted in the ships, right? Did you draw those for your student teaching class and bring them over, or did you kind of have some others for student teaching and then
They were
you made more?
drawn. They were drawn for student teaching.
Okay, so these are like the
They are
originals.
the original.
from the beginning. And so you mentioned that your class size, at least for student teaching, was around 30. I imagine your classes continued to stay around, probably 25 to 35.
No, they would go from 30 to 40.
Okay. How did you handle that many kids? Because even in the simulators today, we don't have 40 kids.
You'd have 3 or 4 kids sitting at one poster control. It was more storytelling than anything because that's all you could do.
Yeah.
They just saw the controls there.
Okay.
And they knew that. And then I would have a script. There was a script that went with every flight with parts that had to be read out loud. So I had to type up scripts, and then I would cut, with scissors, I would cut the part for the different stations. And then I would go to each station, give them their little strips that had to be read out loud during the story. And then I had a master script, and then I would say, in the middle of the mission, I would say, like, Sensors 3.
Okay.
And the sensor station, the kid who had note 3 would read out loud what it said. So that gave everybody something to say during the stories.
So you weren't so much of I guess you could call your position there like a flight director. Did you have any parts that you would say out loud as a main computer or
Yeah,
some
I
other type of character?
played Tex the engineer,
Okay.
and I played the main computer. Well, I played all of the parts, of course.
Yeah.
So if there was an alien, I had to do the part.
Yeah.
Special effects, I had a keyboard, electronic keyboard with different, I'd hit a key for different sound effects, like beeping sounds or notification that this is happening or something like that. And I had explosion. I had a cassette tape player that I'd have to constantly put in a different tape for a sound that I needed. It was very corny.
Yeah, but it's great. And then you had the transparencies, I think you said.
The
that you mentioned
transparencies
before.
for the overhead. Yeah.
Wow. So you'd go through the whole mission and start up, and the captain, I assume you'd say Captain 1, and he'd say some things, and then that would probably spur a few others, and you'd respond or put in visuals or other things like that.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And so how did you move from that into Super Saturdays? Because we're still, I imagine you did this for several years, from about 1983 to...
Well, yeah, I mean, we ran that, and then, I don't know when it was, 84, 85, we joined the Young Astronaut Program, a nationwide club.
Yeah.
And we were Chapter 7534, and we gave ourselves the name Pegasus, and we were a Young Astronaut Club. And so, as I switched, we would do the space things, but then I switched into more elaborate scenarios for club meetings. And so we would hold club meetings after school. And then I changed when we did the club meetings, we turned the gym into the starship. And so the old gym of Central,
Yeah.
I would pull the white screen down on the stage, and we would move desks in, and then we would do more elaborate missions. And the kids liked those. And so I thought, well, what if we turned the whole school into the starship?
Yeah.
And that's when we did our Super Saturdays. And there was only 1 or 2 a year. They were too elaborate to have to stage regularly. But
Okay.
I would block out all the exterior windows so the kids could never see outside,
Yeah.
on all the hallway doors and everything. And we had the school's PA system that I could use for announcements and alerts and things like that. And we used the cafeteria as the bridge. And cafeteria was the bridge, and we used the gym and a few classrooms for learning stations. So the kids would come on a Saturday morning and they would get a curriculum packet.
Yeah.
And it would have the different activities they had to complete during the day of the Super Saturday. And then the mission began in the cafeteria with the bridge and them going off on their mission,
And this is
setting
around-
the course and being on their way.
Uh-huh.
And then I would say to them, okay, learning stations, because I would stand up and say, okay, we're traveling now, so go to your learning stations. And they could pick and choose where they wanted to go. So the gym was used for PE, so they'd go in there and play basketball. But they were expected to get everything done in the packet. But I let them choose how they were going to do it. And so while they were in their learning places, doing whatever I had set up in the classrooms and stuff, so they'd all be in their stations, and then when I needed them all to come to the bridge, I would go into the school office and just come on the PA system and say, either I would play a red alert sound on the cassette tape player, or I would just make an announcement, all officers to the bridge. And then they would all come running back to the bridge, and the story would proceed a little ways, and then they would go back to their stations. And so that just went for the whole day.
And so you had your whole class, or just kind of a subset
The
of
club.
the class? The club.
The kids that were in the club.
Okay, and how many kids were in the Young Astronauts Club?
Oh, I would say 15,
15?
15 to 20.
Okay. So not nearly the size of your classroom, but still a decent amount.
Yeah.
Were you the only teacher in charge of that, or did Mike help you at all? Or?
No, it was just me.
Okay.
Nobody else was that stupid.
And you say nobody else was that stupid. Why
Well-
did you do it?
Because I love doing it, you know. For me, that was fun. But that, for the rest of them, that's not their cup of tea.
Yeah.
They do their own fun things. For me, it was a fun hobby type thing. It was fun to stage the flights, you know,
Yeah.
and put them on. And so, yeah, it was a fun way to spend a Saturday, I thought.
Wow.
So, but not so fun that we would do it more than a couple times a year.
Well, same thing. It sounds like there's just a lot of work that you had to put in.
Lots of work.
To get all of those packets typed up, because they didn't sound like thin packets.
No, they would have to. It took an enormous. I don't know how I did it, to be honest. I was young and had lots of energy because I could never do it now. It's just too much work, way too much work. So
Wow. Do you remember what the story was like? Was it kind of the same thing? You kind of tell a Star Trek
Yeah.
episode?
it was.
Or-
It was Star Trek stories. So that I would adapt and change as necessary.
Yeah.
I don't remember everything about them. I have some of the old scripts in files with the old pictures I would draw that went on them.
Yeah.
But I haven't looked at them in years, so I don't remember every story I told.
Yeah. Were there any students that you remember in particular that were like really good captains or really good other officers that you have a distinct memory of?
Well, lots of them. You know, they were all really good kids.
Yeah.
They just really got into it. You know, I learned that kids have very vivid imaginations, and so I didn't have to do much for them to get into the whole thing. You know, they were just right into it from the very beginning, and they would get very serious about the story. You know, there were times when they would cry, or certain ones of them would cry if something didn't go exactly the way they had hoped the story would go. So they were vested into it. Just mainly because of the time that they were into it. When you're 3 or 4 or 5 hours into a simulation, you get pretty involved into the story.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I'm surprised that you were able to convince these kids to come back on a Saturday and
they
do more
wanted
homework.
to do it. Well, the learning packet was how they earned their club points.
Oh, for young astronauts.
So if they did the packet, they earned their points, and the points led to a rank, and a rank led to different jobs in the ship. So,
as well as a rank in the larger national program as well.
well, the
or-
national program didn't have ranks or anything like that. It was just kind of a space club for teachers to use with their kids.
Okay, so this is all something that you made
Yeah.
and said, this is the rank and
Yeah.
the things you needed to learn.
Yeah.
Wow, amazing that you put all of that together to
Yeah.
teach these kids.
Well, it was all experimentation for me too. I wanted to know what worked, what didn't work.
So you're really experimenting for your own classroom as well during the
Yeah,
day.
just for my own curiosity, just how far could this go?
Yeah.
Because I think in the back of my mind, I thought if this goes well, that I would write it up as a complete curriculum and then try to sell it.
Oh, I see.
And I think that's what my plan was. I wanted to run it, write it up, and maybe submit it to the national office as something else teachers could do with their clubs.
Yeah.
And so I think that was also in the back of my mind, that I needed to make sure that whatever I was doing actually worked. And so,
That's cool.
yeah.
So with that, I know because running the Young Astronauts program, you actually went on several field trips. I think one to the Soviet Union that I remember you telling me about. And
2
another one-
times.
Okay, twice, wow. And then you went to, I think, was it Arizona?
We went to Arizona
Okay.
to see a teacher that had a space shuttle in her school.
And when were all of those field trips? About the years?
The first one was to Japan, and we went to the International Young Astronaut Convention, and that's where I met the teacher that had the Arizona teacher. She had her club at the International Convention.
And was that in 80?
It would have been 85,
Okay.
86 maybe, 87, somewhere in there. And she did a little presentation on this little space shuttle she had in her class. And I was curious, because she had an actual physical set. And I thought that would be kind of cool. And she was running overnight camps too for the kids. And we had Clear Creek going, and I thought, well, that would be an interesting thing to do. And see if we could get a real space camp started here. And so,
Kind of akin to Clear Creek,
Yeah.
but in space.
yeah. And so then we came back, and then I contacted her, and she said, well, bring some kids down and experience it for yourself. So we went down, took a look at it. The kids did an overnighter, and they liked it.
And it was the shuttle program then, so
Yeah.
they ran a shuttle.
Yeah, it was extremely simple. There
Okay.
were really no controls in there. I don't remember exactly how everything worked, but yeah, very, very simple. But the kids loved it, so I knew we were onto something.
And so you decided to take that and
So I came back and asked the
Look for
principal,
grants.
is this something, could we build a spaceship here, like
Yeah.
they have there? And the classroom, the briefing room, was a classroom that was open at the time. And he said, sure, you could put a ship in the back of the classroom, as long as it isn't too big. And so then the grant writing started,
Yeah.
trying to raise the money and see how much money we could raise. And we raised a little more money than I needed for the back of the room. So then came the idea of actually building a bigger set onto the school. And so,
and the principal was A-okay with you pulling out an excavator and starting to dig before you get any permits. from
well,
the-
we didn't have permission, but I thought we did, but we didn't. But we got it.
Yeah, that's great.
Kind of difficult for them to say no after the hole's dug.
Yeah. What would you say to yourself now, if you could talk to yourself back then, would you recommend anything different, or would you say, hey,
I think if I
this?
if I had done everything absolutely by the book, there would be no Space Center. Just because there were too many people that could have nixed it.
Yeah.
And so I had to do a lot of politicking. You know, I had to be sure we had the money, and I had to be sure maintenance was on board. So I had to do some trips to maintenance and talk to the director of maintenance and have him come out. And, you know, we had to talk to Dr. Searle. She was the assistant superintendent over elementary schools. And you know, I had to get her on board. And, of course, most of that was Stan Harwood, the principal, because, you know, Stan was behind the project 100%.
Yeah.
So they would have immediately said no had Stan not been on board, coming to a lot of these things with me. So he traveled a lot with me to go visit these people and to make sure everything was okay and that they understood the school was behind it. And so, yeah, Stan could have stopped it instantly just by saying no, and nobody would have challenged him.
Yeah.
And so the Space Center's here because of him as well, you know, the principal. He gave the green light and supported it 100%.
And how did you inspire that vision in him? Did
Well,
he go with you to like Arizona to
No,
this overnight?
no.
Or?
He saw how successful the club was, and thought it would be a great thing for the kids here, and so he was just always for it.
Wow. And he was the principal still there when the Voyager opened in 1990, right? That's good.
Yeah. So he was principal for a couple years, our first few years.
Yeah.
Then he got transferred to Cherry Hill.